All right, welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how's it going, man? Looks a little overcast there, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty dark and gloomy outside. Yeah, it was pouring rain in buckets today, and does not look like it's going to let up until tomorrow morning. But
Exciting winter in Boston.
yeah, typically snow at this time of year, so I guess I'm glad it's not a foot and a half of snow.
Yeah,
But yeah, a gloomy day for sure, for sure.
love it, love it. Yeah, it's that way here, so very exciting.
Yeah,
Um, Q4 is already almost done. Crazy times, right?
yeah,
We've been talking about how fast it's going to come, how fast it's going to go, and here we are on December 11th. Um, Crazy. October, November, don't know where they went. December's
yeah.
already feeling that way.
Mhm.
So, at this point, you're pretty much doing as much merchant fulfilled stuff as you can to maximize the opportunity. Outside of that, you're just riding the curve and kind of starting to set goals for Q1. I think this is a big thing. I know I've written a handful of blog posts on like goal setting, reverse engineering, things of that nature on the blog. But I think now is a good time to start thinking about what do you actually want to achieve tangibly in 2025? And then reverse engineering how you're going to pull that off.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's an exercise that can be done really effectively, really in any business. Back in sales, it was like I would get a sale once every 20 calls. So you kind of start with that number, work your way backwards, you end with whatever calls
Yeah.
you would have to make or things like that. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear from anyone, maybe in chat or in the comments there, folks who are still kind of selling through inventory, folks who are already kind of past that part in their cycle and are more so looking at potentially analytics or performance, essentially kind of analyzing that and determining, hey, where did I end up this year? Where could I maybe aim for next year? Would be
Yeah.
curious to see where people lay in that life cycle, and also if they're looking at any specific metrics or any initial thoughts on areas where they can improve, areas that worked really well. Would love to hear from folks just how overall performance was over the year.
Yeah. And I think Q1's a good time to experiment, right? Play around. Um, I was at Chris Grant's holiday party last week, and started chatting with a bunch of sellers. And we started, obviously, I started to talk about AI, and I started showing everybody a bunch of different tools and things like that. And it's funny, people are finally starting to think about it, at least be like, okay, let me look into this. Um, there was one seller, they mainly do liquidation. They have a retail store as well. And then um, it's a couple. The guy is also like on the road a lot for his regular job, and we were talking about all the different things. Like he's using some AI listing tool for eBay and things like that. They're like, no, it literally would take us 20 hours, and now it's like 2. And that's like an off the shelf tool. I forget exactly what it was, unfortunately. And I was talking to another seller. His wife, I think it's his wife, does a bunch of like scheduling for realtors. Like
Mhm.
that's her main focus. And
Sure.
I showed him Howie, and he was like, "Whoa, hold on." I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, man, $15 a month." And he's like, "Holy crap!" So conversations are starting to happen. People are starting to think through these things. I know it's really difficult to want to experiment with this kind of stuff in Q4, which I 1000% agree with. But in Q1, I think that's a good time to reassess how you do everything and then see what you can hand over to software, whether that's AI or non AI. It doesn't matter, just tech as a whole. Um, I do think that 2025 is going to be a major shift for us as a society. From a technical perspective, there's already a lot of things that I'm seeing that we're not quite there yet, but in the next handful of months, we will be. So now's when you really want to start documenting what you do and clarifying what you do. I know that sounds not very sexy, but the reality of it is, if you're going to build a team, period, you need documentation. You need to share, here's how we do X, Y, and Z. Here's how we define and measure success. All the things we do here at Aura, which is why it took vastly less time to onboard you than it did Finn, who was the first person we ever hired. And even back then, when we hired Finn, I still had tons of documentation that I was just writing mainly for myself, just so because I'm forgetful, right? We all are. We're humans. But this starts to matter a ton when you can clarify what you do, the steps, all the different criteria, the filters, whatever. If you can do that really, really well and communicate that in written word, very soon you'll be able to hand that over to an AI agent that can take that and be like, oh, cool, I know exactly what you want to do. I understand the nuances because you gave me those nuances. Let me run with that. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of sellers get access to this kind of technology, and they're just going to say, do it. Not, because there's this whole like thing where you're promised the world. And so you think that what you have to give as input is not that important, although it is. Like prompt engineering is a real thing. So there's already been talk about the people that will get the most value from AI, and especially agents, are going to be managers, because managers are traditionally good at communicating. Here's what I need you to get done, and here's the resources, and blah, blah, blah. But it's really holistic. There's a concept called 360 delegation, or maybe it's 365 delegation. If you just look up on Google or use Perplexity, 360 delegation. Sorry, I had to think for a second. It's been a long day. There's a company called Profit Factory that has a blog post on this. I highly recommend it because it basically breaks down kind of what I'm talking about here in a really clear way. And it's basically just saying, listen, there's a right way to delegate things, and then there's like a much, much better way to do it. And there's certainly like really, really wrong ways to do it. And I think sellers tend, and this is just my experience, this is certainly not to generalize all sellers. Most sellers tend to struggle with communication in this way, which is why I think a lot of them struggle with VAs. They're like, oh, I hired a bunch of VAs and it all blew up. Okay, well, we need to pause and say, well, what was the problem? Was it the VA that was the problem? Well, if you hired a handful of them and they were all problems, you're probably the problem. And it's less like you as a person. It's more just like you did not most likely communicate clearly what you expected of them. And then therefore they were set up to fail. So what's interesting is all this technology kind of stuff that's, having us create new skill sets has been a skill set forever. It's the same kind of stuff, which is so interesting, right? It's this anthropomorphic, sorry to use a massive word on you, but like, it's this anthropomorphic thing where, and by anthropomorphic, what I mean is we're treating AI and building it like it's a human. So we're making it human in a way, which kind of makes sense because it's training on the internet, which was, all the content created by mainly humans. So it kind of understands those things. We're not going in and interacting with this alien-esque kind of entity where it's like, oh, it's a whole new thing. It's like, not really. It's actually just like, if you have these fundamentals, which make you good in business, period, that foundational skill set becomes not only the foundation for business, but for using this cutting edge technology. Think about that. Just doing the right foundational stuff already puts you ahead of the curve. And that's why I harp on the foundational stuff, accounting, things like that. It's like, yeah, it's not the most fun stuff in the world, but when you understand it and you can use it and it's in your skill set, it does become a superpower in a certain light because you're able to have a deep enough understanding to make better decisions. But now we're entering into a world where you can take that same information, that same knowledge, that same skill set, and infinitely scale it. Holy crap. This is not even learning some cutting edge tech. Like, you're not learning AI. You're just interacting with it in the right kind of way. So I think, if you're sitting down, looking at your goals, you're reverse engineering them, get super clear for next year, I do urge you to start to look at, what does my documentation look like? Have I actually clarified how I source and what qualifies as a good lead versus a bad lead? What tools do I use? Most of the time, even just doing that, you'll find 20% of the software you pay for, you don't use. And you're like, yep, that can go, right? Or there's redundancy, right? This one tool, or I'm paying for two tools that kind of do the same thing, but this one's better. I'm just going to negate the first one. It just helps you clarify, even just for yourself, what you do, how you get it done. And what's interesting is I did this when we launched the Wholesale Made Easy podcast. Massive whiteboard. Before we even started it, I put this like flow chart of like what needs to happen, right? And then by just visualizing, you do this on a piece of paper too, just draw it out. what are the steps and what have you, I found like 3 points of redundancy. So I said, okay, let's remove the redundancy. What's left is the things that have to get done. And then I moved on to, well, what can I automate? Turns out there's a decent amount of things I could automate. Okay, so I automated that. What's left over is like 10% of the tasks that that a human would have to do. But I got it down to where me as the human, all I had to do was email the person I wanted to interview and then do the interview. All 20 something other tasks were either automated or delegated to someone else. Now that was, 6 years ago at this point, I think. And so a lot has changed in 6 years. So now there's a lot of new software I could use. So like I had somebody help with basically the production of the audio. They put the intro in, the middle part, the outro, cleaned it up, all that stuff. Now I would bet money there's a tool that would just do that for you. You just upload the file, it goes, I'm going to perfect it, blah, blah, blah. Fine. So that's why it's important to continually reassess how you're doing things, because you could be doing things where 40% of what you're doing, you don't have to be doing anymore. And it may not even cost you money to automate or optimize it. So I think you're going to have to view this lens to scale as an e-commerce company, as a seller. I think it's just a requirement.
And I think right now is that perfect time to go through this process, especially coming off the busiest time of the year. You're going to understand more clearly what your workflow looks like when you're working to the top of your capacity. So obviously you probably don't operate at that level in Q1, Q2, probably most of Q3 as well, but it'll probably be easier to identify right now areas that took more time than it should, or areas where you can definitely improve it. And then I think kind of going back to a subject we had, I think it was last week or the week before, around kind of the over promise and under deliver in the AI space right now. I think prompt engineering, like you mentioned, is extremely vital to be able to configure certain AI tools to do a task effectively. But we are still currently in a world where a lot of AI tools or AI solutions are still designed specifically with one task in mind. So you're not going to be able to take any AI tool and have it do every part of your workflow.
Right.
But like you've automated scheduling pretty much to the 95th percentile. So you just CC Howie in your emails, shoot it off, and it does everything else for you. So I think right now is a great time for people to identify what's something that's an easy lift that takes up a significant part of my time. More likely than not, there's going to be a tool out there that can do those more simple tasks for you to free up more time for things like sourcing, which probably can't be offloaded to an AI agent or VA or something that you still want to have more control over. So I think that's very important. And then, like you said, perhaps practicing or working on your ability to communicate effectively in written text, because we may not be at a spot right now or a specific tool that you're looking for in the AI space is available, but with how rapidly it is growing and advancing, it's very likely that in 4 or 5 months, a tool like that may become available, and it's going to be on you to communicate in a written format what you want those tools to do and how you want them to do it. So I think now is kind of a good time to identify that workflow, maybe 1, 2, 3 areas that can be improved, and then write, not in extreme detail, but hey, 2 paragraphs, this is what the task is, this is how it's done, just that when we do get to that point, you can either train an AI agent or train a VA and free yourself up to do more things that are going to impact your business positively.
Yeah, and I kind of think of this as augmentation, right? So one of the things I asked my wife for Christmas is a AI wearable called Compass. I use a tool when I'm in Zoom calls called Granola. I highly recommend it. It's free. I don't know how I'm not paying for it. But instead of like, a lot of people are used to like the Fireflies.ai, where it like has a system where it connects to the Zoom call, it joins it, transcribes everything. That feels kind of intrusive and weird. If you and I are just having a one-on-one, there's this third little AI thing there. It just, everybody feels weird. I know I do. This one doesn't join. It just records everything. It's got a scratch pad so I can take my own notes. And then once we're done, enhances the notes. That's great. I really wanted that my personal real life, not just my digital life, because I have short-term memory deficit, so I forget a lot. And sometimes I should be taking more notes and writing things down, and I don't. So this is like a little necklace, and basically you trigger it and it starts to record. So it's not storing the audio. What it's doing is it's taking in the audio and on device transcribing that to text and then storing that as information. What's cool about that is I can then go and have conversations with those memories, if you will. So I could say, hey, my wife mentioned a dinner party this weekend. Remind me what time and location it was at. And it'll just tell me. I'm like, oh, okay, that's right. And then what's cool is I could then take that and be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Take that, jump into my email and send that to Howie and say, hey, add this to my calendar. Awesome. Like, see how all this is starting to mesh together. And this is like little stuff, but this is how I'm starting to think through it now. It's like, it's helping me augment my personal life and the business. And I mean, listen, what one really interesting thing that I just thought about is coaching for doing wholesale brand calls, right? What if you put it on speaker, you had to record it, you had the whole conversation, and you say, hey, give me feedback on what I really struggled with, what I did well, and give me an after call summary with that feedback every single time. I mean, this is like having a sales coach over your shoulder that hardly costs any money. I mean, this is the out of box thinking that I think sellers need to start looking at. Because I mean, you were in sales, you know how difficult it is to not have somebody there to give you feedback, right? If it's just you having phone call after phone call after phone call, you can pick up some things yourself, but it is kind of difficult. This is why role playing in sales is such a big thing, right? You sit down with somebody who's more knowledgeable, more skilled than you are, and they can pick up those little cues and say, okay, you did this here. Here's how I would have done it. I mean, imagine getting that in just like this little necklace thing, right? Like this is technology I wish I had when I was a seller, because I would have been so much more effective, efficient. I mean, it took me many months to really crack the code for wholesale. With this kind of stuff, I probably could have done it in a few weeks, realistically, if I like set it up correctly and like utilized it. So these are becoming very quickly things that will allow you to go faster. That's insane. I think I mentioned this to you yesterday in a call, but my theme for 2024 or 2025 on the personal front is leverage, right? I want to use more forms of leverage, get better at delegation. I've taken a few courses on it. There's a few books on it. What I want to do is jump into Claude and create a project so I can upload all my notes, all the content from all the stuff that I have consumed, and now have it be my leverage coach. So it understands all the stuff that I have access to now, and I can just chat with it. Be like, hey, I'm struggling in this area. Based on what you know, what I gave you, what should I do? What? Yeah. You don't really need coaches in the knowledge world anymore. Unless you're trying to learn how to swing a golf club better, you probably don't need a person anymore. So this gets kind of fun, because you can imagine taking, getting access to a few different selling courses, taking all the content, creating a Claude project like I'm talking about, dump all that information as files into it. And now you can have conversations with all the information you've collected on a given topic and say, hey, I'm really struggling to source these things. Well, maybe there's an answer in the knowledge you've consumed but forgot. And it just says, hey, well, actually, this course that you paid for doesn't recommend doing it that way. Here's what you're supposed to be doing. You're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. That's right. Let me update my things. Right? Like you can move 10 times faster.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that kind of does all still boil back down to like the prompt engineering in terms of like giving whatever model it is the information to kind of initially work off of. I'd be like in my past in sales, we had tools that would come and record the call and it would analyze. Like one thing we would always focus on was speaking percentage, because nobody wants to be talked at for 30 straight minutes. So we would
no
always
word vomiting on cold calls.
exactly. And it is a skill to be able to both present information in a valuable way, but also keep someone engaged. I think we would always aim for like around 70% talk percentage is kind of that sweet spot of being able to kind of keep someone in the loop, make sure they're engaged, make sure that you yourself aren't getting off topic for what they're looking for, but you are still kind of the star of the show on a sales demo or onboarding call, kind of educating, not necessarily point and talk all the time, but more so conceptually educating someone. So it'd be interesting. I have a couple of friends who work for various sales tools in the AI space where it does kind of do that initial analysis of your own sales call performance, if you will. And some of that feedback is pretty effective. Some of it's pretty generic, but I would be more so curious on kind of what you're referring to, like what that prompt engineering would look like on the back end that gives that AI the initial insight in terms of what to gauge positive or negative performance on. And so, I do think prompt engineering is extremely vital in terms of giving these tools the information needed to make insightful or to provide insightful comments and feedback. Like it is so funny. Things have progressed so quickly, even in just like the year plus that I've been on board in the AI space. But we are still like that 85%, like that last 10% of getting it so that everything can do what you want it to do with minimal lift. We're still getting there. But and Lindy's the tool that you use frequently.
I was going to bring up Lindy actually. I love Lindy. So Flo is the founder of Lindy. He does a lot of cool experiments, but one of the ones he showed is he basically has Lindy join all his Zoom calls. And then it takes all the transcripts, all the information, and stores that in a knowledge base. And there's a podcast interview where he's talking about this. And he's like, I'm French. I'm very direct and sometimes too frank. And in the United States, that's not the right way to communicate. He's like, so I could go into my Lindy that has all my stuff and say, hey, give me feedback after every call. And these are the things that I really care about. And he goes, okay, cool. So he gets an email after every phone call that says, hey, here's what you did really well. Here's a few things you struggle with. And it could be you really belabored the point about this one thing a little too much, or hey, you got way too technical on the details for this one feature when that person wasn't super technical and like that really wasn't necessary. So it's actually surprising that a lot of the feedback stuff doesn't require crazy prompting. Like, as long as you're giving it a persona and you're like, hey, here's the things I really want to work on, or maybe you don't know what you need to work on. You just say, hey, this is the good hack. Pretend you're a world-class sales coach, analyze all I'm doing, understand the best practices, or, hold me against the best practices and let me know how I do. And over time, you can perfect and optimize your prompts and things of that nature. But a lot of this stuff can't happen pretty routine. But what's interesting about this sales thing, right? Because I like talking about sales in the Amazon seller space because nobody wants to. That started to change, luckily, with a new generation of wholesale sellers. They're kind of getting the point. But wholesale, the skill of wholesale is just sales. That's it. You don't learn how to do wholesale. You learn skills, which is sales, and you apply that to this world. There's nothing unique about wholesale. If you get into the concept of flow states, which is amazing, one of the flow triggers is feedback, direct, quick feedback. Well, I have ADD. So when I'm really struggling to get stuff done, I use a spreadsheet called Work Cycles by Ultra Working. And it basically does this, right? I do a Pomodoro. So I set a 30-minute timer. I say exactly what I want to do, give my intentions. I do it. The timer goes off. I come back and say, did I get it done? Where did I struggle? What went well? I'm creating a feedback loop with myself at a high enough frequency, which increases the amount of time I can be in a flow state. If you're jumping into phone calls, calling brands or distributors or suppliers, in every single one, you're getting direct feedback on what you did well and what you struggled with that you can immediately make changes on, you will go into a flow state more easily than not doing that. Now, the way I compensated a decade ago when I did it is I had a legal pad, and every phone call I wrote who I called, date, whatever. And I had these questions I had to answer. What did I say that went over really, really well? So I could do more of that. What did I say that didn't land well? So I could do less of that. And then what questions did they ask me that I didn't have the answer to? And so anytime I got a question I didn't have an answer to, before the next call, I looked up the answer. And sure enough, 2 calls later, I would get that question. I had an answer ready to go. And I sound like I've known it for a decade. I didn't. I learned it 10 minutes ago. But again, I'm creating that fast, high frequency feedback loop after every single phone call so that I got exponentially better over the course of a week or 2 weeks. And that's how you do this. Now, you can do this with sourcing though, too, right? Like set a timer for, let's do maybe 60 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that, right? Set criteria. My goal is to source 10 SKUs in 60 minutes that are profitable, that meet X, Y, and Z criteria. Okay, great. Set the timer, do the work. Once the timer goes off, pause. Did you do that? No. Okay, let's go deeper. Why did you struggle? Well, I got distracted by something. Okay, remove the distraction. Let's try it again. Or I hit a brick wall and I'm spiraling. Okay, great. Stop after 60 minutes. Don't spiral for 4 hours. Spiral for 60 minutes. Pause, reflect. Figure out how to solve the problem that's holding you back, your bottleneck right now, and then go back into another cycle. You can do this yourself. This is such a great thing to do as a solo founder, is like create this stuff for yourself. Eventually, yes, you can use software to do this kind of stuff. You can use AI to sit in on conversations to give you direct feedback, so you're not having to do it yourself, because there are things you're gonna miss and forget. Totally happens. But what's important here is that you're building up your pattern recognition for what works and what doesn't work at a vastly compressed period of time than the average person. So when I talk about this concept that I'm trying to formulate called the exponential seller, I think this is part of it. Now that I'm thinking about it, right? How do you solve problems exponentially faster than the average seller? How do you scale exponentially faster and higher than the average seller? Well, fundamentally, it is going to come down to you. Eventually, as a business owner, the growth of the business will be limited based on you and certainly your team. But I would argue that's still a you problem, because if you can't build the team, it's still a you problem. So it's, can you quickly overcome problems? Can you self-correct super fast? So if you're like, man, Dylan, I've been doing this for a few months, doing OA, RA, what have you, and I'm just struggling. Okay, define that for me. We need to figure out what the struggle is. Is it that you're not efficient enough? Is it that you're not effective enough? Could one software solve that problem for you? Or is it the way you're doing it is slightly wrong and we need to fix it? And where a lot of people get stuck, and where I most certainly did, you have this concept, I call it course hopping, right? You jump into a course, you figure out enough to get started, you get moving, but you're not really like crushing it yet. So you go, you know what? I'm missing something. I know that I am. So you go to the next course, and then the next course, and the next course. What you don't realize is that you're trying to solve that last piece of the puzzle, that thing that you feel like you don't know, but you're doing it in the wrong way. Because what that piece of the puzzle is not more external knowledge, aka courses and things of that nature, although those still help. It is your experience. You have to do enough of it to hone your own intuition to understand what works and what doesn't work for you. But not a lot of people talk about that last piece of the puzzle and how to optimize that. And that's what we're talking about here. Listen, you can jump into hardly any FBA course, go 0 to 80 pretty fast, but you're still going to hit problems, walls, whatever, right? So by creating that tight feedback loop for yourself, you're able to overcome those even faster. So when people say, I only have 2 hours to source, that's not enough, I go, well, maybe, I don't know. We need to measure it. Because maybe you have 2 hours to source, but really you're only sourcing for 1 hour because you keep getting distracted on Discord. right? Like you're like, well, I'm being productive because I'm asking questions and blah blah blah. True, but you're not spending 2 hours sourcing. That's a different thing. So I'm hoping that yes, you could do a lot of this stuff yourself. There's spreadsheets, there's the paper pad method certainly, but I'm hoping that we'll get tools that will make that a passive thing to do. Like you don't actively have to do these things. It will just be like, hey, here's where you struggled. Here's where you can get better. Here's some recommendations. And you go, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And they have access to so much, like AI models have access to so much knowledge that we just don't as an individual. And so it might make a recommendation that you never even thought of because you didn't even have the language for it. Right? Like when we start talking sales, a big subject of sales is handling objections. Well, if you're not familiar with the subject of sales, the word objection may not come across your mind unless you stumbled upon it. Well, this thing could say, hey, here's 4 objections you almost always get in these phone calls. Let's work together to formulate a response that works really, really well based on the previous conversations. So now it's personalizing the recommendations. It's not just find the objections and deal with them. Okay, sure. But like, what does that mean? Like how you handle objections with a personal trainer is very different than being a car salesman or tech SaaS, right? Tech sales, vastly different worlds. But with this having enough context of who you're talking with, the actual conversations, the actual words that the brands and suppliers and distributors are using when talking with you and most likely venting their frustration, it has a much better degree of giving you how to handle at least a starting point. It's not going to be perfect. Nothing ever is, but just to get you that 80% on a lot of those things, I think can happen pretty fast. I know there's been a lot of companies. I'm not sure if Gong does this, but the feedback stuff, right? Of just like, it's going to sit in on the call and it's gonna be like, hey man, I'm going to hook up to your knowledge base. If somebody asks a question, I'll give you the answer via chat. So you just have it at the ready. And maybe we wrote some documentation on here's the best way to handle this particular objection. When that comes up in the conversation, just give that to me so I have it ready to go. But I'm curious, like, if there's any others right now.
Yeah, Gong is the tool that I use in my past, and it's been a few years since I actually used them. So I'm not sure like where their feedback has improved or like the functionality of their offerings there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's definitely, and what I always enjoyed about sales was you can almost only ever get to that 85% because that last 15% in sales is still going to be that human element. When you get the same objection from 10 different people, but the most successful response is probably only going to work on 4 out of those 10. And that's where it is fun to try and plug and play. Hey, this is the most common objection, but this person falls under profile A. Like, for example, in sales, you're never going to sell to someone who's brand new to an industry the same way that you're going to sell to someone who's been in the industry for 10 years. It's just completely different. They're going to, if you're given the educational piece to someone who's been in it for 10 years, they're going to feel like you're not aware of the conversation that you're even in. So it is fun to kind of rotate those different things and figure out what works best. And in sales, your conversion rate is probably never going to be higher than 50%. If your conversion rate,
if you're doing 50%, oh my God.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah. So if you ever get to that point, please shout it from the rooftops. I would love to hear what you're doing. But I think most importantly in what you mentioned is that feedback loop, being able to get accurate and actionable feedback in a timely manner where, I mean, I always loved working with managers who are good at providing that feedback and able to kind of cut through the noise and not give me a big long spiel on where to improve, but just a couple like, hey, this here, that there, and then let's just see how that goes. Because it is going to be, like I said, a plug and play, see what works well for some folks, see what doesn't. But just increasing that feedback loop is going to be really impactful. And then I think that kind of goes back to a point you made earlier, is that managers are going to be most effective at using these AI tools because coaching in a succinct manner is something that's an inherent skill to them. So being able
Right.
to break through all of the unnecessary noise, boil it down to 5 sentences is going to be something that helps you create more impactful or more automated flows via AI or whatever tools you folks are using. But yeah, a lot of fun in sales. It's always interesting to try and figure out what type of person you're on the phone with,
Yeah.
what's most important to them. And I think a lot of that comes down to experience. But then another thing is discovery questions. You never want to just go in with what you're looking for. It's really important to figure out what's important to the other folks on the phone as well.
And this is very true for wholesale, right? So the conversation I'm having with, if I call a brand, and my favorite was small to medium-sized brands. Like they have a lot of, growth happening, but they're not massive. They're probably getting overlooked. I love those brands because there's a lot I could do with them. Sometimes they're big enough to have sales department. So if I knew I was talking to a salesperson, I kind of knew that they're thinking 10% of whatever number I threw out. So I'm intentionally going to be like, look, I'm looking to spend 30 to 40 grand a month with a brand in this category. I just wanted to call and see if we'd be a good fit. It seems like it is, but I had a few questions before, having a more serious conversation. Right. So like, one, they just heard a number and they're like, that would be a nice commission. And two, I've shifted the power seat, so to speak, just a little bit where I'm like, I'm kind of interviewing you, not the other way around. Now, if I call and it's the founder of the business, different conversation entirely. I'm not throwing out numbers. I'm now digging into their story. I now want to understand what are they trying to achieve, like as a founder, not just like more revenue. Yeah, sure. But like founders want to achieve more than just revenue. So I try to peel back the layers to understand what are they really, really caring about? And then how do I attach myself to that? And then once we've done that and built that relationship, now it's exciting for us to work together. Now we can talk business. Like, so there's a lot of complexity to this. But what's so interesting is why couldn't you have an AI phone agent? Let's assume it's good, like the one I showed, I think it was a week ago, where the first question it goes, hey, who am I talking with? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Oh, this is a salesperson. Go down this path. Or, oh, this is a founder. Ask these kind of questions, right? But that's my whole point here is like, unless you've mapped out the pathways for some of this complexity, it's really hard to hand that over. Because the moment I say, okay, I want you to call this brand and lock down a deal, it goes, okay, what does that mean? What does lock down a deal mean? What are the objections I can anticipate handling from your experience? If I don't say, hey, listen, here's how, if you find out this is a founder, here's the type of conversation I want you to have, and here's the questions that really matter. Or if this is a salesperson, it's a different conversation. But if I have all this mapped out and documented, one, I could go hire a human. I can hire a VA that has good sales skills, and I can say, hey, kind of here's the flow. Take this as like the starting point and go make it better. Because ideally, you're hiring people that are dramatically better at the skill than you are. You're just giving them a starting point to say, hey, here's all the stuff I've already figured out to like get you running faster. But now you go apply your experiences and skills to make this even better. And that's how you have this evolution of the role and task and process. But I think the same could be true for handing this over to an AI. What's nice is AI is coachable, right? I could listen to the let's say I record the conversation. I could be like, all right, this brand asked this question. The answer you gave was not perfect. In the future, here's roughly how I would want you to answer this question. And it goes, okay, cool. So now every future conversation, that question comes up. That's how it gets answered unless you tell it otherwise. That's crazy. But again, that's a manager skill set, giving feedback and saying directly, okay, here's what went well. Here's what didn't go well. Again, things that I'm telling you to do on yourself in the early days, you now want to do externally, either to an AI when we get to that point or to a human. So I mean, listen, things are heating up, right? That's the reality of it. I think we'll get agents in next year, in 2025. And I think it is going to have most of us rethink what a business is. I know a lot of people play Factorio. I have a few friends who are begging me to do it. I will not do it because I know I'm going to get hooked on it. It looks so sick. You're basically building like an automated factory in space or something like that, which makes me so happy. But I'm like, I can't do it. It's going to suck up too much time. But a bunch of tech founders were like, wait a second. Do we ever get to a point where building a company feels like playing Factorio? Yeah, actually. And this is something I harp on Flo a lot because I think he's an awesome founder and like he's a good thought leader. Yeah, Jacob, +1 Factorio. How did I know that you played Factorio? That makes me so happy. So that's Jacob on our team, by the way. So what's cool is, you know, he made a Twitter post about this and then kind of shared some example cons. Yes, Jacob's waving back there in the background. So he shared like one of his big Lindy's. I mean, this thing is crazy complex. But then when you think about it, you're like, wait, this is like playing a video game, right? You're looking at the process. You're thinking about all the inputs, processing outputs, all this kind of cool systems thinking. And then you're just building it and having it do. I mean, you know, the shirt thing. I think I shared this with you guys not too long ago, where pretty much my entire email is automated for the most part. So if you email me for an Aura t-shirt, I won't see the email. Lindy will go back and forth with you as many times as it takes to get the 4 requirements it needs to ship you a shirt. Once it has all 4, it then emails Finn on our team with everything he needs to get it done. I'm not in the loop anymore. And that's not even that like complex to build, which is kind of funny. It was like 3 blocks in reality, like inside of Lindy. But that's kind of like playing a game. Like I'm building this automation to handle this whole thing. And then I can go in and tweak it however I want. So I'm working on the process, not in the process kind of a thing. But it did kind of, it forced me to pause and say, well, what is the right thing to do here? How do we define success? When does the agent decide I have enough to send this to Finn? Or when does it need to keep going back and forth with you? I have to give that information. So the first, and I mean, I tested the crap out of this thing for a few hours with Finn. I was like, sorry, Finn, for all the emails you're getting. But I intentionally tested this and kept being like, you know, I'd send one of the requirements. It'd be like, awesome, thanks for sending that. Here's the other 3 I need. I would only send the second one. And, right? Like I would just keep going back and just like really testing it. But then you start to realize, oh, this thing can handle a lot of stuff. And it has infinite patience. It doesn't care if I'm being rude in an email or hardly giving you what you need. It's just going to keep coming back and say, hey, awesome, appreciate that. Can I have this other thing now? You know, and it's like, great. But when you take something like that small as a process, it's really easy and fun to conceptualize. But when you try to go more macro with it, that's when things get really interesting. And I think you'll get to a point where you're kind of, you really need to be a systems thinker as a business owner. You're going to have to be. I mean, you should be anyways. This is like a foundational thing in my opinion, right? Like what's the process for anything you do from the smallest thing to like, how do we restock the fridge in the office? Like, right. Like we have a process for that in Notion, right? It's like pretty routine now. But if you can start to clarify those things, you can start to hand more and more of it over. And I think eventually, you know, I think we'll get here, but my kind of fantasy as a seller is I have a bunch of AI agents that I say, great, today I've got $5,000 to spend and it knows my requirements. It's got access to all my previous data. You know, maybe I have a data analyst agent that analyzes all the trends and goes, cool, here's what the purchaser needs to know. Here's what to look for. Here's what to avoid. We've really been struggling. You know, shoes have been awesome, but the return rates are sky high. It's actually not worth it anymore. Don't buy any more of that. It goes, okay, I won't do that. And then an hour later, I get a bunch of receipts. And it's like, cool, we spent the $5,000. Here's what I spent it on. Here's the expected ROI. By the way, I put this all together into a single email, and I sent this over to your prep center. They're in the loop on everything. Once I get the tracking information, I'm watching your email. Once I get the tracking information, I'll pair it with the right ASINs. I'll also send that over to the prep center so that they have what they need. Like, I didn't have to do anything but give some input, which is like, I got $5,000. And heck, we can take this a step further and have another agent that checks my bank account and goes, cool, Dylan uses Amex. Whatever he's got available on credit, that's what we're spending. And once every morning, 8 a.m., it goes, great. How much you got? You got 10K today? I'm spending 10K today. And maybe tomorrow it goes, You got $5. I can't do anything with that. Sorry. We're going to take a break. Great. Whatever, So I think we get to a point where you're really just building this. I don't even know what to call this. It's almost like a digital factory is what I'm going towards, right? It's like this digital factory where you get to tweak the knobs to suit what you want and what you care about, and everything just kind of flows. And funny enough, this is where most sellers want to get to, right? They're like, I hired 10 virtual assistants to do sourcing. They have a process that we follow for ordering, and then they ship it over to the prep center and blah, blah, blah. Like, you're already doing a lot of this, but my point is, take that a step further, lean into that kind of stuff. And I think eventually you're not dealing with VAs anymore. You're dealing with these agents that can have access to far more data, make better decisions faster. And then I think it's a capital game. It comes down, like, if you know you can spend any dollars you have available every single day, like, do you raise money? Are you just happy? Like, what do you do? And this is like, these are big questions. There's no right or wrong answer here. Some sellers are gonna do that, cap it out every single day and be like, I don't want to keep growing. I'm happy. But my CFO agent knows to reinvest 25% of the profits. So I grow at that rate and I'm happy. Awesome. Other people are going to be like, I'm going to go raise $1 million and I'm going to spend it in 30 days. Great. That's more input into the system. So I think very quickly we get to that place. Now, this sounds very sci-fi. I understand that. But when you start to look at the components of what I'm talking about here and look for companies that are building each subcomponent, you realize this is not a technical limitation. This is technically possible. It's just arranging these components in the right way. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not really an engineering problem necessarily at like a deep level.
Yeah. And the way I've always looked at things is it's always like, no matter what business you run, it's all cogs that are interlocking and working together. It's just a matter of how many cogs are you manually turning, how many cogs are on the market where you can just buy it off the shelf and plug it in and it's going to fit perfectly. How many can you buy that you're going to have to then tweak a little bit so it fits in, and then everything kind of ranging on that scale. So right now, if you have a highly manual process, now it's time to identify some cogs that could maybe fit in perfectly, minimal lift, and then just automate that. That frees you up to either turn a different cog, or a lot of folks that I work with like to, take their hands off the cog, spend time with them, whatever your hobbies are, do that. That's also totally fine and a great end game for all of this as well. But it will be a mix of perfect cogs, imperfect cogs, and then cogs that have yet to be built. But there's going to be something that falls along that range. It's just about identifying what's most impactful, which ones are going to fit most perfectly, and kind of going from there.
Yeah, I think I shocked a bunch of sellers at AMZ United when I started to talk about this stuff. Like, okay, that sounds cool. You're a nerd. I get it. Then I started to show actual examples of tools doing this stuff. They're like, wait, what? Everybody perked up immediately when I showed a list of tools. They're like taking screenshots like, oh, I got to look at that one. Like, this stuff's here, so it's, and Jacob can, in the background, he can check me on this, but there's I always butcher the analogy, but it's like the factory of the future, the business of the future will have one man, a machine, and a dog. The machine does everything. The man is there to like maintain the machine, and then the dog is there to make sure the man doesn't touch anything, is roughly what it is. It's like, I think we're kind of getting there. Like, it's cool. But like, I harp on this a lot, is like the accessibility of this stuff, right? This is not just going to be massive. Yeah, Jacob, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I always butcher it a little bit, but that's roughly what it is. But this is not just for Fortune 100 companies, anything like that. Like, this is for everyone. I mean, SMBs, which is what we all are, small to medium-sized businesses, single founder, single business owner, single person businesses will be able to have access to the stuff because the cost is so low. And I think if you take anything from this conversation, is Q1 is the best time annually to start to think through this lens. And again, a lot, in my opinion, will change in 2025. A lot of this stuff becomes real. Like, some of this stuff is kind of just research right now, or like it kind of works, but it's not really reliable and all that stuff. But a lot of that's going to change. And once we get true AI agents from the models, aka like OpenAI, Anthropic, things of that nature, not just like what a lot of people are calling AI agents now, which is really just AI automation with LLMs inside of it. I think those two things are fundamentally different. But when you have an actual AI agent that can control your computer or can spin up a virtual computer, and you can have 10 of those running in parallel, and they can reliably do the task you're asking them to do for pennies on the dollar, it's going to force you to rethink everything you do. And I think it's going to change a lot of the services in the Amazon space. So if we look at listing optimization, most resellers don't do it because it's time consuming, or you pay somebody to do it, in which case it's capital intensive. So like, what's the point if I'm only going to be on it for 2 weeks? Sure. But if it costs you no time and hardly any money, but you could get a 10% lift in sales, would you do it? Probably. Well, why not just have an AI agent that really deeply understands how to optimize listings? It's running on some computer in the cloud, and you say, great, every time I jump on a new listing, here's the process. Auto optimize my stuff for me. You don't have to wait for somebody to build that software anymore. You could just go do it yourself, and you'll make tweaks, and you'll make it better and better and better and better. And now all of a sudden, something you couldn't foresee doing because the friction was too high. Now the friction went down practically to zero. And now you're doing 10x the output as an individual business owner. And other sellers may not be willing to do that because they didn't experiment, they didn't play around. And now you're leaps and bounds ahead of them. And they're like, what are you doing? Well, I'm an exponential seller. I'm going to trademark that at some point, I swear. But this is the kind of stuff that as a company, I like us to think about, right? Because this also helps us understand what software to build, right? This is the whole reason why we built Maven. It's like, let's take this high amount of variability, this high amount of complexity that are listings, because no one listing equals the other. And what if we could take all that complexity and reduce it down to be as simple as possible for the average non-tech savvy, non-nerdy seller to get value from? That's our challenge. And that's what we've done. So now it's like, how do we take that concept and extrapolate it into other areas of the business? And so that's really what we're focused on right now, is like getting that foundation of data to say, cool, what can be done here? What can be automated? Not just with basic, I hate to say basic software, but what we're used to as software, right? Algorithms, things of that nature. Like, could we put intelligence inside of these things and unlock more of the latent potential of your data? Like, how can I make you a world-class data analyst without you having to be a world-class data analyst? You got good questions. Can you ask those? Yeah. The problem most of the time is you don't know how to answer them. What if that completely went away, right? That compression of time that I was talking about early in the conversation. It's like, the faster I can serve up possible problems, the faster you can fix them and self-correct. The faster you can answer the questions, your burning questions you have, the faster you can make decisions and get intelligence, get information, get data, whatever you need to move faster. Like, if it takes you 2 weeks to answer a question because you just can't get to the data or what have you, that's 2 weeks that went by that you didn't make progress. But if I could take it from 2 weeks down to an hour, 2 minutes, what does that mean for you? That's interesting, right? A lot of what we do, and we call ourselves sellers, but we're really knowledge workers at the end of the day, right? We're not really doing anything physical. I hope you're not doing your own prep work. I don't think it's really worth your time. But we're knowledge workers, right? So we're taking in information, we're processing it, making decisions, doing things with the information, and then there's some kind of output. That output could be a decision, doesn't matter. But most sellers struggle with that aspect. And man, I just the thought of unlocking that for the average person is mind blowing to me, and it's a big driver for me personally. I think it's probably one of the most exciting concepts, having been in the space for a third of my life at this point, is like, what if we could do that? So it's exciting. I mean, this is why I think it's important to have nerds in your software companies. That's why I tell everybody, I'm like, no, we're a team of nerds. Like, I promise you that, first and foremost. Like, we geek out with what we do. Otherwise, it's boring to me. So,
no.
But yeah, this is our rant for the day.
Yeah. And I'll reiterate, this is definitely the perfect time to kind of analyze your process and figure out what works best. If you're, I mean, unless you're selling flowers or chocolate leading up to Valentine's Day, you're not going to be busy in January or February. So it is the perfect time to kind of identify areas where you can optimize, maybe work on feedback, increasing efficiency, whatever it may be. So yeah, I would encourage folks to definitely do that. And then, I forget the name of whatever theory it is, but it's something if you spend 18 minutes a day, every day for a year on any topic, by the end of that year, you're going to be more well-versed in that topic or more skilled at that activity than 90% of the people in the world. So if you think you don't have time, you can carve out 18 minutes a day for whatever it may be, whether it's optimizing sourcing, whether it's working on those sales skills, whether it's looking at how to better manage your inventory, whatever it may be. You're going to become an expert in that by the end of the year. So definitely kind of a good time to do that initial analysis and figure out maybe where it would be worth spending those 18, 20 minutes a day.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic thing. And just imagine that compounded every single day, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not going to take a full year to like you're going to compound pretty fast. So awesome. I think we'll wrap up here for time, but Casey, anything you want to leave it on? I feel like we covered a lot today. So
nothing major regarding Aura directly. One thing I did see was that Amazon Web Services was having a massive outage today. So if you're running into any issues on your Amazon store, it looks like it is still ongoing, impacting things such as Facebook, Twitter, all sorts of things. So if you are having issues, it's likely due to that. Obviously, always feel free to come and ask us any questions via chat, but that may be tied to any of the issues you're experiencing. But other than that, we'll be on same time, same place next week. No other updates or anything there.
Sweet. Awesome. We'll see everyone next week. Have a good one.
All right. Adios.